Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com. Today we're going to make a German chocolate cake that consists of 3 layers of chocolate cake that are sandwiched together and frosted with a really nice sweet and gooey caramel flavored frosting that's loaded with chopped pecans and coconut. So we're going to start by making the chocolate cake batter. So preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And you will need 3 8-inch by 2-inch high cake pans. That would be 20 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And what you want to do is both butter and flour the cake pans, or what I always use is just one of those non-stick cooking sprays that have the flour already in them. And then take a piece of either parchment paper, or you could use wax paper, and just put it in the bottom of the pans. And that will prevent the cakes from sticking. It's kind of an extra thing there to make sure they don't stick. And then, now if you don't have a big enough oven to fit the 3 pans on one rack, what you can do is put your oven racks in the top third and the bottom third in the oven, then you can put 2 on one rack and 1 on the bottom, just in case you don't have a big enough oven. So now what we're going to do is melt some chocolate. Now, a German chocolate cake gets its name from the fact that it contains a type of chocolate called German chocolate, which is a really sweet chocolate. I find it a little too sweet for my taste. So what we're going to do for this cake is use a combination of semi-sweet chocolate and cocoa powder, and that will give us a really nice chocolate, deep chocolate flavored cake. So what you need is 4 ounces, 115 grams of semi-sweet chocolate, and chop that into small pieces and put it in a heat-proof bowl, and then just place it over a saucepan of simmering water, and then we're just going to melt it. Stir it every once in a while as you melt it. Okay, that's melted. So just give it a quick stir. So now I'm just going to let this cool to room temperature, and then we'll start the batter. So now we will sift the dry ingredients together. So have a separate bowl, and I'm using a strainer. You could use one of those hand sifters as well. So the first thing you need is 2 1/4 cups, which is 260 grams of cake flour. And the cake flour gives the cake a really nice soft and tender crumb. That's why we're using that instead of just the all-purpose plain flour. And then to that I'm adding 3/4 cup, which is 70 grams of cocoa powder, unsweetened cocoa powder. And I prefer to use the Dutch process. I like the flavor better for this cake. If you can't find it, then you could just use a regular unsweetened. And then I need 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I like to use the kosher salt for this. And then we're just going to sift this together. That way they all mix together. Plus we get a little air into the dry ingredients, which is always good with cakes. Plus, cocoa powder always has lumps, so a way to get rid of all those lumps. Okay. And then I'm just going to give it a quick whisk, just to make sure things all mixed together. You especially want that baking soda and the baking powder to be mixed into the other dry ingredients thoroughly. And then for our wet ingredients, we have 1 cup, 240 milliliters of just like warm coffee. Now, if you don't want to use coffee, you could just use water. So I'm just going to put that in here and mix that with 1 cup, 240 milliliters of buttermilk. Now, you can buy buttermilk. You can use, there's a buttermilk powder you can buy now, and I have noticed you can find the buttermilk powder in most regular grocery stores now. Or you could make your own buttermilk. Just take a cup of milk. You could use like whole milk. I've used 2%. And then just add a tablespoon of either a vinegar or lemon juice and stir it together, and then just let it sit for about 10 minutes at room temperature, and then it's the same as using buttermilk that you buy. So I just mix those two together. And then for the batter, if you have an electric stand mixer like I have, you can just use a paddle attachment. You could use a hand mixer, but as you can see, this is we have a lot of batter here, so make sure you use a large bowl. And then what we're going to start with is 1 1/4 cups. That's 270 grams of butter. I like to use the unsalted. You could use salted. If you use salted, I would just leave out the salt in the recipe and have it at room temperature. And then I'm just going to beat this just until it gets nice and creamy and smooth. Okay, just scrape down the sides of your bowl as much as you need to. Make sure everything gets mixed together. And now we're going to add 2 1/4 cups, which is 450 grams of granulated white sugar. And I'm going to just have my mixer on low speed and beat that in gradually, and then keep beating it until it's light and fluffy. That would probably take somewhere around maybe 3 minutes, somewhere there, around there. Okay, so this is what you're looking for. It's very light, fluffy. Now, if you were using a hand mixer, it might take you a little longer to beat this than if you're using a big stand mixer like this. So just keep that in mind. That does take a while. And then I'm just going to scrape down, make sure everything mixed together. So next, what I'm going to add is 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and try to use a pure. It's a lot better flavor than the artificial. And then we're going to add 5 large eggs and have those at room temperature. And I'm going to add them one at a time. Beat one in, and then if you have to scrape down the sides, and then beat the next one, and then you'll have a nice smooth batter. So I'll just add 1. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to fold in or beat in that melted chocolate that we've cooled a little. You don't want it really hot because then it would melt everything. So that's why we did it the first thing we did when we were making this batter. So it's time to cool. Just beat that in. Okay, so now what we're going to do is add the dry ingredients, and then like in 3 batches, and with the liquid in 2. We don't want to add all the dry and then all the wet, because then we'll be flying up in our face. So add about 1/3 of your flour mixture. And then Have your mixer on low speed because you don't want that coming up in your face. And then I'm going to add half of the liquid. Okay. You really smell the coffee and the chocolate. I love that combination. And then I'm going to add half of this dry ingredients. And then the rest of the liquid. And then this way it's a lot easier to get a nice batter, and then you don't overmix as well when you do it gradually like this. So just scrape down as you need to. Like I said, make sure you get the bottom of the bowl. And we'll finish that, mixing that in. Okay. I'll get a little flour here. I'm just going to mix that in by hand. Now this makes, as you can see, it's a lot of batter, and we got 3 layers. So this makes a big cake. This is what I would consider a party cake, because I would say 14, 16 people. Okay, so now we're going to divide the batter evenly between the 3 pans, as evenly as you can. Now if you had a scale, what I often do is weigh it, and that way you can get an even amount, but we'll just try to do it today. Eyeball it as best as you can, because the reason you want the same amount of batter in each pan is you want the cakes to all bake the same amount of time. If you had too much in one to the other, then they would bake unevenly. So you can take the back of a spoon, or I'm just using an offset spatula here, spread it out evenly. Beautiful batter. Okay, looks good. I like to just give a quick tap just to make sure there's any air in there. Now, we're going to bake these somewhere between 30-35 minutes, depending on your oven, until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. And if you gently press the top of the cake, it'd be like springy. Our chocolate cakes are now done. If you insert a toothpick into the center, it will come out clean. So now what we're going to do is just let these cool on a wire rack for about 15 minutes, and then I'll show you how to take them out of the pan. So when you take the cake out of the pan, the first thing I like to do is lightly butter the cooling rack, and that way the cake will not stick to the rack as it cools. And then just take a sharp knife, or I have a spatula, and just run it around. Make sure it's not sticking. And then just take a rack, flip it, and then just peel off your parchment paper, and then flip it back over, and there you go. So we'll let these cool completely, and then we'll start the frosting. So now we'll start the frosting. The first thing you need to do is take 1 cup, that's 240 milliliters of pecans, and toast them in the oven. And you just do that in a 350 degree Fahrenheit, 180 degree oven for about 8-10 minutes, just until they're brown and you can start to smell them. Then let them cool, and then as you can see here, I've chopped them fairly finely. And then you will also need 1.5 cups, that's 360 milliliters of either shredded, I'm using shredded here today, or flaked coconut. I'm using the sweetened coconut, but if you want, you could use the unsweetened. And then we will also need a 1/2 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Now, this is a cooked frosting, so in a medium-sized saucepan, you will need a 1/2 cup, 113 grams of butter. I've just cut this into smaller pieces so it melts faster. And I'm using unsalted butter here. You could use salted. If you do use salted, just leave out the salt that we're going to put in. And then you will need 1 cup, 200 grams of granulated white sugar, 3 large egg yolks, and have those at room temperature. And then 1 cup, 240 milliliters. Now you could use either evaporated milk, or you could use some kind of cream, heavy or light cream. I'm actually using a light cream here. Of course, if you use heavy cream, it'll have a richer flavor. And then I'm just putting a pinch, about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Now what we're going to do is put this over medium heat and bring it just to a boil, and stir constantly because we have egg yolks in here and we don't want those to curdle and start cooking. And either I'm using a heat-proof spatula or a wooden spoon. So we're just going to stir it until it comes to a boil. Okay, it's starting to come to a boil. So just keep stirring. We just want to thicken it up a little bit. Just adjust your heat as you need to. Just want a gentle boil. You want to stir this constantly so your eggs don't cook. So we don't want that. Okay, so I'll just remove from the heat. I'm going to pour it into another bowl so you can see what I'm doing. Now that took about, I would say, 5 minutes to thicken up, depending on how high you have your heat. And then I'm just going to stir in a 1/2 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, and then the coconut, and our pecans, or pecans, depending where you live, how you pronounce it. Doesn't that look good? So now what we have to do is just let this cool, and as it cools it will thicken up, and then when it's spreadable, then we will assemble our cake. Okay, so now we're ready to assemble the cake. As you can see, the frosting is nice and thick. This will take anywhere from ½ hour to an hour. And then what I've done is, on your serving platter, I put 1 cake layer. I put the bottom is now the top, so then you get a nice flat surface. If your cakes are a little domed, what you could do is just take a sharp knife and cut off the dome, or just kind of press down, because you want fairly flat layers here. So then take about 1/3 of your frosting. Eyeball it here. And then just spread it out. And then just take your second layer. Just gently press to compact. And another third. And then our last layer. As you can see, it's a really tall cake. And again, try to make sure it's even here as best as you can. And we'll just put the rest on top here. As you can see, this is a real party cake. Like I said, it serves 14, 16. And just spread it out. And there you have it. And if you like, what you could do, if you think that's a little plain, is what I do is take some extra whole pecans and just decorate the top. Like so. So there you have it, a German chocolate cake. So until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.